When Prejudice Meets Persistence, a Story of Redemption. Isaiah Walker traced the frayed edge of his well-worn notebook as he hurried down the crowded hallway of Jefferson High School. His second-hand sneakers slapped against the cold linoleum floors, each step echoing his quiet determination. The thin canvas of his shoes barely cushioned his feet, but he had long since learned to walk in a way that minimized discomfort. It wasn't the holes in his shoes or the threadbare backpack that mattered. It was the knowledge he could gain within these walls. "Hey, Isaiah." Dr. Benjamin Harris's voice echoed from the science wing. Isaiah turned to see the elderly professor-turned-high school volunteer researcher standing at the doorway of his lab. Dr. Harris's wire-rimmed glasses slid down his nose, his kind eyes crinkling in a warm smile. "Still on for after school today?" Dr. Harris asked. Isaiah's face lit up. "Yes, sir. I read all about emergency response protocols like you suggested." "Good man," Dr. Harris nodded. "We'll put that knowledge to work today." The brief exchange warmed Isaiah's heart. Dr. Harris wasn't just a mentor. He was one of the few people who truly saw Isaiah's potential. The modest stipend Isaiah earned from assisting in the research lab helped him buy school supplies, but the real treasure was the wisdom the retired emergency medicine professor imparted. At home, his grandmother, who had raised him since his parents died in a car accident when he was 5, always said, "Education is the key that opens every door." Their small apartment barely contained their dreams, but it overflowed with love and determination. Every morning, she pressed his clothes with an old iron, trying to mask their age with crisp lines and careful mending. Isaiah slipped into his biology class just as the bell rang. Miss Evelyn Monroe, with her sleek blonde hair and tailored navy suit, stood at the front of the classroom. Her style was always impeccable, a stark contrast to the drab institutional walls. Her sharp gaze swept the room and paused at Isaiah's patched jacket, her lips pursed with barely concealed disapproval. "Today's lab requires precise measurements," she announced, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone used to being obeyed. "These materials are expensive, so handle them with care." Isaiah carefully placed his notebook and pencil on the desk. He'd learned that excellence was his armor, knowledge his shield. Despite Ms. Monroe's frequent scrutiny, he maintained a solid A in her class. The lab progressed smoothly until Jason Reynolds, 2 seats over, accidentally knocked over a beaker. Glass shattered on the linoleum floor, and several students jumped back in surprise. Isaiah instinctively moved to help clean up, but Ms. Monroe's sharp voice cut through the chaos. "Walker, stay at your station. We can't risk more accidents." Her tone implied something deeper, an accusation without words. Isaiah's face flushed, but he swallowed his frustration, focusing on his work with precise, deliberate care. He noticed some classmates offering sympathetic glances while others smirked behind their hands. During lunch, Isaiah escaped the cafeteria chaos, retreating to the library where silence and books offered sanctuary. He unwrapped half of a peanut butter sandwich and opened his treasured medical textbook, a gift from Dr. Harris. "The human body is an incredible machine," Dr. Harris had once told them. "Learn its mechanics, and you can save lives." As sunlight filtered through the tall library windows, Isaiah became engrossed in a chapter on cardiac emergencies. His sandwich sat forgotten as he absorbed information about the human heart, its fragility and strength. A collision of worlds. After school, Isaiah's world shifted the moment he entered Dr. Harris's lab. Here, labels like poor or outsider held no weight. Only knowledge, skill, and curiosity mattered. "Remember, Isaiah," Dr. Harris instructed as they practiced emergency response techniques. "In a crisis, seconds count. Knowing what to do can mean the difference between life and death." Isaiah nodded, performing chest compressions on a training mannequin with steady hands. "You've got natural instincts, son," Dr. Harris said proudly. "Your circumstances don't define you, your mind and heart do." Later that evening, Isaiah walked home as dusk painted the city in soft hues. The streetlights flickered on as he reached his apartment building. His grandmother sat on the worn couch, still in her scrubs from her nursing shift. "How was school, baby?" she asked. "Good. Dr. Harris taught me more emergency procedures today." She smiled, the tired lines on her face softening. "Your daddy would be proud, Isaiah. He always said you had healing hands." As they ate a simple dinner, Isaiah thought about the biology test scheduled for tomorrow. Despite Ms. Monroe's cold demeanor, he was determined to excel not just for himself, but for his grandmother, for his parents, and for Dr. Harris, who saw his potential. The breaking point. The next morning, Isaiah was running late for the first time. His grandmother's health had taken a bad turn, and he'd stayed with her until a neighbor could come to help. Now he raced through the rain-soaked streets, clutching his backpack. As he reached the school doors, the worn zipper broke, spilling his carefully organized notebooks across the wet ground. Frustrated but undeterred, Isaiah gathered his things and burst into Ms. Monroe's classroom. The late bell had already rung. The entire class turned to look at him. "Mr. Walker," Ms. Monroe said coldly, her eyes narrowing. "How kind of you to join us. Where's your late slip?" Isaiah swallowed hard. My grandmother was—" "Save the excuses," she snapped. "You know the rules." He stood frozen, his heart pounding. "I'll stay after class." "Out. Stand outside by the window. You can watch the class from there." Humiliation burned through Isaiah as he gathered his things and stepped into the hallway. Through the large classroom window, he could still see the lesson unfolding. Ms. Monroe gestured to the whiteboard, explaining cellular division as if nothing had happened. Isaiah's fists clenched. But as he stood there, isolated yet still within sight, something shifted in him. He noticed how Ms. Monroe occasionally rubbed her temple, her movements less fluid than usual. A flush spread across her pale face, subtle signs of distress. His training kicked in. Prejudice can be dangerous, Dr. Harris had told him once. But in a medical emergency, all that matters is what you know, and how fast you act. Moments later, Ms. Monroe swayed at the front of the class. Her hand shot out, gripping the edge of the desk. Her face had gone ashen. Isaiah's heart leapt into overdrive. She was in trouble. The turning point. Without hesitating, Isaiah threw open the door and rushed inside. "Ms. Monroe," he called out as she staggered. Students gasped as she collapsed, but Isaiah was already at her side, easing her gently to the ground. "Someone call 911. He barked, his voice steady despite the chaos. He checked her pulse, rapid and irregular. Her breathing was shallow. Textbook symptoms of a cardiac event. He quickly positioned her legs to improve circulation and loosened the collar of her blouse. "Stay with me, Ms. Monroe," he urged. The classroom had gone silent. Students stood frozen, watching as Isaiah moved with the calm precision of a trained EMT. Minutes stretched into eternity until paramedics arrived. Isaiah recited her symptoms and the steps he'd taken, impressing even the seasoned first responders. "Kid, you just saved her life," one paramedic said, clapping him on the shoulder. As they wheeled Ms. Monroe out, she opened her eyes briefly. Her gaze locked onto Isaiah. "Thank you," she whispered, tears welling. A new perspective. The next week, Ms. Monroe returned to class after her recovery, but something in her had changed. She called Isaiah to her desk before class. "I owe you an apology," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "I misjudged you, Isaiah. I saw your clothes, your background, but not you. You saved my life when you had every reason not to." Isaiah's throat tightened. "You needed help. That's all that mattered." Ms. Monroe smiled, a soft, genuine smile that felt worlds away from the coldness she once wore. "You taught me more than I could ever teach you." Word of Isaiah's heroic act spread through the school. Doors that had been closed to him began to open. He was offered leadership positions, scholarships, and the respect he had fought for so long to earn. But for Isaiah, the most valuable reward was seeing how the school itself began to shift, teachers reflecting on their biases, students breaking down social barriers, and Ms. Monroe leading the change. The ripple effect. Months later, at the school's senior awards ceremony, Dr. Harris presented Isaiah with a full scholarship to medical school. "As a community, we often fail to see the potential in those who don't fit our narrow expectations," Dr. Harris said. Isaiah didn't just save a life that day, he opened our eyes. The auditorium erupted in applause as Isaiah stepped onto the stage, clutching the scholarship certificate. In the crowd, Ms. Monroe clapped the loudest, tears in her eyes. Isaiah's valedictorian speech echoed through the hall. "We all have windows in our lives," he said. "Sometimes we're inside, sometimes we're on the outside looking in. But what matters isn't where we stand, it's whether we choose to break the glass when it's time to act." And as the crowd rose in a standing ovation, Isaiah Walker realized that even the deepest prejudice could be shattered by a single act of courage.